Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Hello. I'm going to close that window there because it is hot. I have toddlers, so those blinds don't survive all the time. So, hello. Another fine installment of Is That Window Too Bright? I'll reposition once I get some stuff figured out with the house. But right now I'm trying to see if we can get that shot in a little bit tighter. Here we go. Try to you get so much range here. Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you may be. And welcome back to another exciting episode. Thank you, Charles. I appreciate that. Of Revolution Gathering. Diet Coke. Hope everybody had a great week. It's always a good time to realize your glasses are filthy when you start the tape. Well, welcome everyone once again. I hope you all had a great week. I can't believe we're at the end of April and that rent's due tomorrow. Well, actually, kind of probably today, but it's Sunday. So, and I know that you folks in the UK have a holiday tomorrow. So, it must be nice. So, today, I think, I try to give everybody a few minutes to run late because I'm like the world's latest runner often. But, let's see how we're doing here. Let's get started. What do you say? Let me just jump right into this thing. So I was this week listening to a podcast called Why Theory. You can listen to it, pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts. And one of the hosts' name is Todd McGowan, and he is a theologian. He's not a theologian. He's a philosopher. And he's written some really great books, and I really like his work. And so, anyway, I was listening to their latest podcast on their show, Why Theory. And hopefully Todd McGowan, speaking of Todd McGowan, he wrote a great book on Hegel. And I am working on right now trying to book him to do an interview with me for Revolution, for our gathering, so we can talk to him about Hegel and Hegel's understanding of religion and Christianity and the contradiction, which are a few little things we'll cover today, but Todd is just really, tops when it comes to understanding Hegel, and it would be great to have him here. So we're actually working on a couple guests right now. I think we have one set up for July that's going to be really good. Very excited about. So when I was listening to the podcast with Todd, they were talking, he wrote a book called Enjoyment on the Left and Right, and where he kind of talks about like where these different political systems kind of get enjoyment out of. Now, I'm not going to do great at summing it up because it's, a philosophy book and it's a philosophy, but this is why I was listening to the podcast, because I wanted to hear a little bit more about the book. And he was talking about what different systems, different, like what the difference of the right and the left, where their enjoyment kind of comes from, and what their goals are, and how the enjoyment is almost outside of the political system, but it's also these needs to like really what the contradict the what you know the what versus the other, okay, the opposites of what they're arguing about. And we're talking about how the idea was that the right get kind of their satisfaction, their enjoyment from, and you even have to go like with philosophy, you have to look at every word. So like the word enjoyment doesn't mean like everything. It's really very particular. So I'm probably not doing it justice. And and not to see this as a slam, just to kind of see this as how the system is set up. But the idea is that some of the enjoyment, even if it's unconscious, things that we don't recognize, the right, the idea was that the right, this thing is that believe that the right believe that only some belong, like only these people belong and these people don't belong, and these people are a threat and these people aren't, and we've got to, get rid of the threat. And the left believe, or used to at least, that everyone belongs, like it's universal belonging. No one's a threat. Kumbaya. Everybody's, I'm going to hold hands and sing Hands Across America. We're going to sing, We Are the World as Hands Across America happens. I think that's changing a little bit, because I think a lot of times now that I find that the left feels that the right don't belong. I think both are getting joy out of only who belongs and who doesn't belong. And this kind of goes in with a little bit of what we were talking about last week, of that concept in the church that we often see of who belongs and who doesn't belong, and also connects with the concepts that we were talking about with Tillich's You Are Accepted, talking about grace and how sin is separation and grace is reunion. So we're going to cover a little bit about that today as well. So here you have this idea. Now at the end, they were talking about these concepts of belonging and who belongs and who doesn't belong. And what I thought was interesting, and I see this a lot with Peter Rollins' work with the pyro theology, is it kind of switches things around. It kind of puts things on its head. It takes a wider range. It goes, how could this work? And they kind of went there at the end. And I don't know if they were kind of joking and kind of serious, but it was the idea that they started to play with this idea, is that maybe no one belongs. And maybe that's the secret. The secret is nobody belongs. And I like that. I like that a lot. I like that idea. And you say, well, Jay, I felt like I haven't belonged before and I want to belong, and I don't like that idea. And I get it, but I've also felt like I haven't belonged myself. But why do I like this concept of not belonging? Well, I felt like we could kind of mess with it a little bit and look, and you're going to probably think the only book of the Bible I know is Romans or Corinthians or Galatians, and maybe it is, who knows. I'm sure some of you have heard me read from the Gospels. But the idea of, in Romans, I don't even know why I'm looking it up, but I just want to have it word for word rather than Romans 3. Acts and Romans, there you are. Okay, Romans 3. No, it's not 3:3. Romans 3:23, where it says, since all have sinned and all fall short of the glory of God, they are now justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is Christ Jesus. Now, I want to kind of look at this in a way of like not belonging and taking it kind of in the, because it reminded me of that, like, we're all sinners, and there's a lot of people who are like, I don't like the idea that we're all born in sin and we're all born sinners. And, and I sometimes see people, like, especially like ex-Christians or like, I grew up evangelical, like, we're not all born in sin, we're not all bad. And then you like turn on the news or you go on social media and you go, really? And when I mean sin, I mean as in the Tillichian idea of sin, of the idea of separation that we talked about earlier this year of sin as separation. Not just separation from God, but separation from our understanding of that, but there's separation from others and separation from ourselves as well, and even separation from living the lives that we're called to live and being who we are. So this kind of separation. So it reminded me of that, and I was thinking about this idea of, also the idea of where when Jesus is at Matthew's house, and the Pharisees show up and go, why is Jesus eating with these type of people? And I always have I have the New Living Translation memorized in my head because that's when I read when I was younger. But he would say, like, I've come to call sinners, not those who think they're good enough. And I liked the idea of those who think they're good enough. You know what I mean? I've come to call those who are separate. I come to call those who feel separated from life. Come to call those who feel separated from themselves and separate, not those who think they're not. Basically, the idea of all of sin too is like we're all in this kind of separation and working there in the midst of this separation. You know what I mean? So Jesus is kind of bringing this reality here. And then when you look at this and it says, well, since all have sinned, all fall short of God's standard. Like, earlier we were in this, and I know I read this last week or the week before, the idea that no one is good, no one is righteous, where Paul is quoting the Psalms. No one has ever done anything right. All have turned astray, But here Paul says, since all have sinned and all fall short of God's glory, they are now justified by his grace and through redemption as Christ Jesus. So we've got this idea of we don't belong to sin anymore because of Christ Jesus. But at the same time, we don't really belong to grace either because we all sin and we all fall short. And so you've got this contradiction, if you will, of being in the process of reunion and separation. Now, this idea of contradiction is kind of a Hegelian. Hegel really grasps onto this. But what we do is we learn there's a contradiction here, is that we're in the midst of reunion and separation at the same time. Now, I am going somewhere with this, so please hold on. Buckle up your seatbelts. It's going to be a wild ride. So we don't belong to sin, and at the same time, we have grace. So what's all sin? The contradiction allows us to be in grace and to grow. The contradiction is this contradiction allows us to grow on our own. So this contradiction of sin, of separation and reunion, coming together and being like this, allows us to kind of grow on our own. The contradiction and the idea of that, or this idea that nobody belongs, allows us, one, to grow on our own, but also allows others to be who they are and allows them to be into their moment of acceptance and reunion. And I almost want to say that I think this concept of no one belongs in a way gives us a common ground to not only respect the other, but to love the other. And at the same time, realizing like being tolerant is part of being in a community of the other. And I don't mean like this passive aggressive tolerance of put up with their grossness, their bullshit. Oh, I put up with all that crazy. But that we go like people are different. People are struggling through different things. They have different life stories. They're on different journeys. They come from different places. And they're experiencing some of these things differently. Their unconscious is doing different things. And we're all trying to work this out together. And so this contradiction of realizing that we are yet separate and reunited at the same time kind of puts us in this area where we have to live to another level of truth, another idea, a philosophical idea of something beyond truth, something greater than that. And you may be like, oh, it's too philosophical for me. I get it. I understand. I struggle with it and I wrestle with it just like I do with these theology. So only knowing or willing to be honest about our contradictions are we able to, only us know what our contradictions are, and are we willing to be open about those contradictions. But here's the problem with some contradictions, is some contradictions in our lives are in our unconscious, that we'll never be able to solve, we'll never be able to deal. It's just something that we have to live with and be in and live within that moment. So, so here it is. By allowing others to live in their own contradiction and helping them to be honest with their own contradictions, in a way, we're allowing a community to happen in a way that hasn't happened before. When we go, nobody belongs, then we stop fighting for, us to be the only ones that belong. It's like, it's like if you're trying to, if you are accepted by that greater than yourself, right? We talked about that with Tillich's talk. You're accepted by that greater than yourself. Something you may understand, something you may not understand, but you're accepted by that which is greater than yourself. But you are also rejected and separated by others. You are also rejected and separated by those like you. So you're accepted by something greater than yourself, but you're also not accepted by certain humans, certain other people, certain politicians, certain politics, certain ideas, certain religions, certain concepts. If you go to another country and see how they do things differently than us. And then they look at us and think, well, we're so prideful because we think everybody else should live like us. So you have that idea. So what you have to do is realize that you have your own acceptance. But by realizing that, hopefully you get the understanding of realizing that others are accepted as they are, that they are also on a journey. And you say, well, Jay, we're supposed to say people to repent. But the problem is we've taken this idea of being so obviously like, you have to repent, you have to change, you have to be just like me, you have to turn around and follow my way. Which I think a lot of us who attend Revolution and are here would say that's not worked for us. Matter of fact, that's chased us away. We've been chased away by that kind of, you've got to do this. So instead, what we can do is we can live as examples. And we can love as examples. And we can try to set examples of one, who we want to be and who we would like to see others be. That we can learn to have hard, tough conversations and not always demand our own way. And I promise you, in some ways, when you do that, when you show a lot of grace to people, you'll be amazed that sometimes that grace does get returned. Not always, because I have a lot of people who don't show me that grace, but usually knowing people in the human sense of the way, like in real life, in person, working with other people, I have learned like, oh, that guy really is forgiving, or that guy's loving, or that guy doesn't get along. Like I worked with a pastor friend of mine, and we did Revolution together in Atlanta during the end of my time there. And we disagreed on a lot of stuff, but we could argue well. We could disagree well. But the one thing we both knew is that I think we both knew we both fell short, basically, of a lot of things, not just God's standards, but a lot of things in life. But we also knew that we loved each other, that we really cared about each other. His name was Stu, and if you saw the documentary, you probably saw Stu in there. We knew we loved each other. And the good thing about me is Stu is this type A personality, and I learned that this type A personality can be really harsh and really in your face, but also like once you deal with this situation, you've dealt with the situation. Me, I don't know, type B, I don't know. I'm introvert, quiet. Have an argument with you, I'll probably be thinking about that argument 6 years later, one night in bed. But when you learn these different things about people and how they work, something new opens up and you grow. It's the idea of saying, all things are when all things are acceptable, but not all things are beneficial. You know, it's the idea of this grace concept. If you're given grace, well, then what do? You go, I'm gonna go out and drink, party. You know, it's like for me when I realized God loved me no matter what, and I could drink all I wanted. I kept drinking for a little while, and then I realized that the drinking was making me miserable. It wasn't God being mad at me, because God wasn't mad at me anymore. You know, or going, Jesus crying, or Jesus holding me as I have the nail and the thing in my hand, like that old painting in the Christian bookstore. No, no, no. It wasn't that. It was the idea that I knew I was free, and I wanted to live a life that I could enjoy. I wanted to live a life with some peace in it. I know and realized there needed to be a change, and it wasn't based on my big dad in the sky is mad at me. You know, it wasn't that. It was that there was something that needed to be fixed, and I was able to do that when I had that freedom, and that's what grace offers: is freedom. Freedom to do your thing or not do your thing. So what I'm trying to say is when these contradictions come together, when no one fits in, when we're all outcasts, we have a little bit more of an allowance here to change, and we're all more willing to change because we're all not sitting there going, you need to be like me, or or God, I need to be more like them. I mean, how many times I've been around other Christians in my early years of doing this work and been like, I just don't add up, or like I could tell they didn't think I added up, even though I disagreed with the theology completely. I still felt like this big, like I know I'm right, but I still would like to make them happy. Ba-da-ba-da-ba, you know. And who knows, what the contradiction in those people's lives were. So remember, I said that you are accepted, but that is greater than you, but you are also rejected and separated by that like you. Not you, but like you. The great contradiction. So Hegel said that this is the pain, that contradiction is the pain of living. I'm really giving you a short little, this isn't a quote or anything, I'm just giving you a short little bit of understanding. It's much deeper than this. If you've read Hegel, it's almost impenetrable. But this is the concept, and that this is the pain of living, even an actual, it's almost the concrete existence of life is this contradiction. It's to feel is to live. For us to feel. So often we hate our pain and we want our joy and we don't want to feel all these things, and that would be great. But we wouldn't understand peace and joy if we didn't feel these other things. For example, why do we live like we live and try to live like we live and try to not let life get mundane? And when you hear people in their later years say like, well, I wish I would have been braver, or I wish I would have done more, or I wish I would have taken more chances. Because they realize that life is ending. And so when we're able, I have life ends on my tip of my fingers here, life ends. Because it's the concept is when we realize that's when we truly start to live. When we realize we're not going to live forever. Like when you're a teenager, oh my God, I thought I was going to live forever. And now it's like, ugh, this thing's still happening. But Hegel would say that this pain, this contradiction, which even can be unconscious but still cause pain, is living. It could even be seen as the concrete existence of life. Oh yeah, congratulations! We have a year sober in the house, or maybe longer. I'm sorry, I just saw the congratulations. So. As I said before, the idea of we have this great contradiction, and this is how we live with this contradiction. So if you really think about it, I think you can understand that no one really belongs. You're always going to feel left out from something. And the idea is how do we all just get to this realization that none of us belong? Otherwise, if we try to belong, when we try to belong or try to make us our way the right way, which Christians are notorious for doing, only tyrants try to do that. Only it's like, Hitler, oh, we got the Jewish folks, they're the problem, get rid of them, everything will be great. These are what tyrants do, and it's strange that we don't see this a lot of times within the Christian faith of like, especially in more conservative Christian ideas of like, well, if we just get rid of, like, if we just make our conviction a law, then we'll no longer be under threat. And, maybe these people will go away, and then we just make everything we want legal. And that's being a tyrant. That's not drawing people to Jesus through the love of Christ. That is forcing your will on others. That is forcing your convictions and your religion on others. Now, if another religion comes in and tries to do that, we go, oh, it's barbarian. They're barbarians, Oh my gosh, look at them. Holy war, and we do it all the time, and we don't realize we're pointing, and we've got all these these three fingers and thumbs pointing back at us going like, you're doing it too. Matter of fact, you're doing it right now when you're pointing your fingers. You're saying they don't belong because you belong. But the fact is, none of us belong. If we learn to think of it in a more literal sense, in this country, in this ground, in the United States, we don't belong. We're not natives. We showed up and we took it over and said, oh, now we'll give you a little piece of land and you can belong on that. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so there's a case of some people who do belong, and that's just going like, And we've got to learn from that type of cruelty, that type of harassment, that type of thing. It's like, this isn't the way to go. The way to go is to realize that none of us belong. Now, in this way, we may also be able to see that we can learn, we've either got to learn to live together in some sort of peace or die together as fools. And I think at this point, and no one's going to wake up tomorrow and get rid of one of the political parties. I don't even see a whole lot of difference between the political parties. I see some good things that the left does, and that's why I've been Democrat most of my life, all my life. But I see a lot of still money controls the system. And I think that's an issue, and I wish we had more parties and more groups, and it wasn't just this binary way of this party or that party, good and evil, and I'm going like, ugh, both of these, nobody seems to be doing anything. I mean, the same issues I was fighting for as a youth are the same issues people are still fighting for now, and dealing with, and not a lot has changed. So I don't know if the answer really lies with the people who are causing us to be separate, because I feel like the leaders are really just separating us through a few issues. Well, we'll have these issues and we'll have these issues, and these issues will break you guys apart, why we really undermine the whole system, is how I feel. And so that might sound a little radical, but that's just 47 years of living and reading and studying and thinking and watching and paying attention for me. So only tyrants come in and say, you're my way or the highway. You've got to think like me. You've got to be like me. You've got to do like me. And so I was thinking about this, of organizations I've been kicked out of. I have never been kicked out of a public school, but Christian schools I have been kicked out of. Christian churches I have been asked to leave. And it's not just because those are the only areas I hung out. I've hung out in lots of secular clubs and done things like that, and I've never been really carried out by bouncers or anything. But I've been carried out of a lot of Christian events and different things, and warned at Christian events. And you're not acting like one of us. You're not doing the right thing. You're not saying the right thing. I've been banned from Christian events, and it's the idea of it's all about it. That he doesn't agree with us, so we must separate ourselves. And all of a sudden it goes like, well, then now the conversation's over. So now I'll just go and be radicalized and do a podcast, video and podcasting every week, and I'll do that because we've been separate, so we're not talking anymore. The conversation's over because you don't want to talk to me anymore about my belief system, and the only way you want to talk to me about this. Now hear this, because this is coming from this side. It's going, and the only way you want to talk to me is if I change, and that's not really conversation. That's not. We're probably where the conversation's going to go. And so we have to think about this as we live in a world that's so divided, that we may have to live in a world that's divided where people have ethical thoughts and things against us and don't care about what we want. But by separating ourselves from them and ignoring this this other contradiction that comes in here, with these other two forces, that is something I think is more fixable than the contradictions I've been talking about of us being separated in grace at the same time. I think that's always going to live with us. Is that now we're not talking, so now nothing's changing. And I think politicians like that. I think social media likes that. I think people like that because I think people make a lot of money off of that. People get a lot of votes off of that. Oh, help us, because I would argue with one of the things that they were saying is like, well, the conservatives like to get rid of this group. But I think the liberals use the fear mongering just as much as saying like, oh, these conservatives are going to get in here and they're going to take away everything, and you're like, oh, well, I saw the guy in Florida, the freaking governor in Florida, that guy freaks me out, so you think, oh yeah, and we get these extreme ideas and go, oh yeah, of course this could happen. Or we think about Trump, blah, blah, and we have this one-sided way of judging. So we separate. So we get so busy biting and devouring one another that we're consumed by each other. And that's how we die. And leave that to our children and our children's children until they probably figure out something better, a better idea. Or we can learn to have tough conversations, much like the philosophers do, and people and thinkers and psychiatrists, and they go there and they debate about these ideas and things like. There's something to that. There's something to debate. There's something to admitting that we have different ideas and different opinions of things, but when we're not arguing those ideas, we're able to be human to one another, maybe in fact even have a good time with each other and talk to each other. We have more of an ability to see people transformed through relationships and through personal relationships than I think we do through just throwing out ideas and then turning the TV off, or just saying my way or the highway, and you're just a hateful bastard, and not really. It's like, maybe they're not. Maybe they were hurt by someone and that's why they're doing this. Or maybe they've been taught their whole life that this is what God thinks. And in their mind, I don't like it. You ever hear people sometimes like, well, it's not me, it's God. They've been taught to believe that way about God. And they're even at that point admitting, it's not me. I would like it differently, but that's God's rule. Like, to them, they're even admitting, like, I think God's kind of a jerk, but I have to follow God. So people like us can sit down like, maybe God's not such a jerk. Maybe this isn't the way to go. We can have those conversations. And we don't have to allow that. There's a contradiction we can look at and maybe change. All right, I'll stop beating the dead horse there. So we don't belong in order for others not to belong. You see what I'm saying? We don't belong for others not to belong. I think if Jesus was setting an example of anything, he was saying that he had no reputation and that he did not belong. But at the same time, he was going, the way this thing is going is not, we're all in this together. There's mistakes being made. When we don't belong, we stop trying to make others belong. You see, when we go, well, maybe if we all don't, I'm going to stop trying to make others belong and apply to my newsletter and try out my way of life. I know this seems like contradicting to what a lot of us were taught growing up in the church, but the concept isn't that. The concept literally is, how do we become a better community by not belonging rather than a community of having in and out, in groups and out groups and levels of, this is why Paul was saying there's neither Jew nor Gentile, male nor free. This was radical stuff being said. And at least this is what I'm drawing out of the text. Okay, I'm willing to say that maybe I'm getting the text wrong, but this is what I'm drawing out of the text with my own life experience, my own study, my own thoughts of what philosophy says and theology says. So if we stop trying to make others belong, we can't, when we stop trying to make I'm reading my notes. When we don't belong, we stop trying to make others belong, trying to convict them to act like us. You're like, oh, do you hear that still small voice telling you not to be more like me? It's easy to say the still small voice when you're like, you go to a church of like 1,000 people and they're like, do you hear that still small voice? Well, I hear 1,000 people who think the same way and I think differently, and then I probably need to get in line. Is that the still small voice you're talking about? The fact that people are making me feel like I'm kind of an outsider and could be welcomed into the group if I just changed, or if I just said this prayer, or if I just agreed to this. I had somebody send me a message recently telling me like they saw that I was being deceived by philosophy and by the philosophy of men, and then they used a 2 Timothy scripture, and then they didn't realize like I don't believe that 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, or Titus should be in the Bible, and I don't give them any authority whatsoever. But that probably makes me more of a heretic. See, the philosophy got to Jay. It's not the philosophy, it's the scholarship. The biblical scholarship turned Jay wrong. And in some ways, growing up, it's so funny in some places, in some churches, I would go, you gotta have a personal relationship with Jesus, And then you go to the more liberal churches and they're like, no, it's not a personal relationship with Jesus, it's a communal relationship. So I'm going to go with more of the evangelical thing that I heard is that maybe we need more of a personal relationship with Jesus. Maybe Depeche Mode got it right. We need the grace to live in the contradiction. We need to learn how to have our convictions and at the same time not even respect others' convictions, because you're not going to respect something that you don't agree with necessarily, but to at least say, I'm going to try to tolerate this conviction because it's very different than mine. I don't understand it. And my first thing is to belittle it. But out of respect of you as a fellow human being and the fact that none of us really belong, I'm going to try to sit down and understand at least where you're coming from. Or maybe you can ask the person. I know Peter Rollins did this with a lot of people in his, he does these like small communities for short times. And he did this thing where it was like asking like people from other faiths and other belief systems, like, what do you think when you see me? What do you think when you hear me talk? Maybe that's it. Maybe it's just sitting down going like, what do I look like through your eyes? Because that might expose a lot, not only to them, but also to us. I remember one time I was still living in, I believe, New York. And I came out to Washington for a wedding. And this guy came up to me and goes, yeah, I used to believe what you believe, and now I don't, and I feel better than ever, and I'm freer than I've ever free. I feel great. I'm happier than I've ever been. I can't subscribe to that bullshit. I was just like, well, how are you? Nice wedding. And I said, what do I believe? And he goes, well, I went to this church here. And I'm like, oh, what church was it? A church called Mars Hill. Oh, was Mark Driscoll's church? Yeah. I said, well, I don't subscribe to anything not a whole lot of me and Mark don't have a lot of common ground. And we have very different theologies, different ideas, come from completely different backgrounds in the church. And I disagree with a lot of what his work is. And I said, so what you don't believe is not what you haven't given up what I believe because you don't know what I believe. And I've given up what you believe and I feel happier, but I still believe. I still have this system in my life of Christianity and things like that. And so we were able to kind of have this conversation of like, oh, okay. Like, there's not just one flavor, there's not just one type, which can be confusing at times. But that idea of you guys are all shit, he realized was wrong. I realized, where he was coming from wasn't directed at me. It was directed at other hurt and other pain from somewhere else. And once again, we learn from that. We learn that people have hurt and have pain and are willing to go up to somebody who they think, well, that person has a MAGA hat on, so I'm going to let them have it because they must believe that. Or like I know people who voted for Trump the first time, didn't vote for Trump the second time because they just couldn't get themselves to do it. But we're still Republicans and still this and still lovely people and still friends of mine and still in deep relationship with me, but they're not the scary guys that you see on, what's the comedy channel, the news show, what they show interviewing where the people are like, they're making fun of them. They find those people because they're a comedy show, because they make money making people laugh. So they find the people with the loudest contradictions and probably not always the smartest people. And usually they're well-intended, but they don't know what they're talking about. And those are the people they find to make fun of. They don't find the well-bleeding heart conservatives out there who are, salt of the earth type people. They don't do that. And so we get these extremes. The idea of the personal faith, the personal religion, the personal Jesus is just this idea that allows us to know where we stand, where we are accepted, and where we're at. And it also allows us to learn and change. I will tell you, Dan McLaren, the scholar, biblical scholar, I've learned a lot from this guy. And there's stuff that I don't like agreeing with that sometimes he gets right. Like, I go, oh, and I look into it and I go, oh, you got that right. And that's not what I wanted, but that's the reality. And then I have to negotiate that. Do I take it as something that's important, or do I go, oh no, this was something of antiquity. This is something that was more of a Middle Eastern tradition, or this is Paul's idea of sexuality is way outdated, and do I just go, okay, we've grown from that. We've bound. We talked about that, remember last week or the week before, bounding and loosing. We loosed that, or we let that go. We realize that that's something that's hurting other people at this point in life, and this point of existing, So we've loosened that. We've got, oh, this doesn't work anymore. Even radical, even conservative evangelicals would reject some of Paul's sexuality ideas of like, well, sex isn't for fun. It's just to get that out there and then tame it down. And really the only reason you should be married is because, if you can't control it. And then when you do it respectful of God. You know what I mean? Like there's just they're like, have a good time. It wasn't like, hey, we're having this 6-week sex challenge. Paul would have been like, what? Why would you do that? It's a waste of time, because Paul thought Jesus was like coming back quicker than Jesus did. Sorry, that was me listening for Jesus coming back. So here's the concept. I think you've heard the concept, but I am simultaneously separated and united. I am accepted by that greater than me, but I am also separated by that like me. And I want to live in that. And of course, the idea of revolution, my concept of life and living and following this religion is grace, 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 which is reunion, reunion, reunion. Reunion with myself, reunion with others, reunion with God as I understand God. So here we are, simultaneously separated and united, sinner and saint, truth and fiction. That's what Chris Christopherson said about Johnny Cash. It's partly truth, partly fiction. So I think it takes that concept of all sin, all fall short, and then that concept of maybe it's that Todd McGowan was playing with me. Well, maybe it's we just all didn't belong. Maybe that's the idea, is that we all don't belong. And that gives you a lot more of a grace attitude of not belonging, or this idea, like we turn sin into like, sin, it's bad and you're evil and you're horrible, and like, oh, you're going to grow horns and a tail and, start killing babies. Like we've really like turned it into like this weird thing. And like God pukes in his mouth, pukes all over us when we sin. Like we've really turned it into, rather than seeing it as separation and seeing it as something that we can kind of work with and fix. We've kind of given it this great power. We love to do that. And also scares people, and they have to say a prayer and then join our communities. And grace is reunion. So just by the idea of saying, I'm going to live in a life where people are naturally separated. We're all separated. And I'm going to live a life where I realize that's part of it. And that we're all kind of outcasts. Even the politicians, because I look at politicians, they might not be outcasts in their world, but in my world, they're kind of outcasts. Like they're like out of touch, And so in my world, I'm going to go, maybe I can talk to them. Maybe I can do things to change that. Maybe I can organize groups and help people think differently. Maybe I can write books. Maybe I can speak every week. Maybe I can speak in other places. Maybe I can do my due diligence to help other people. Maybe I can train other people who are going to do and take these ideas to other people, even better than me, which I think I do, and you have. And I can think of people in my mind who are examples of that. That's the cool thing about kind of being called to teach. is that you were able to see people do really great stuff that you're going like, oh, it worked. So that's today's talk. Let's live in the imperfection and the contradiction of it all, and realize that that's the meat of living. That maybe we need to jump into that, into the real existence of existing, and see where we're able to maybe make a difference in that. So that's just an idea that's been in my head, rolling around, taking down notes. So I hope you find that helpful, and we can continue to talk about this more in the future as well, as I'm able to reflect on it deeper. And we're gonna asking someone like Todd to come in and talk about this, and I'll bring up this talk and I'll bring up his words, of course, and we'll talk about that as well. And I'm hoping we're going to have Dan in like 5 or 6 months also come in and talk to our community. So we're working on making all that kind of stuff happen. So thanks everybody. Listen, if you like what we're doing, you like what I'm doing, you like hearing this, you like meeting together, and you definitely, if you'd like to see more, you can go to revolutionchurch.com. Top of the button, make a donation. Next week, this is why I'm announcing this. Next week we will step into the year 2000, and we'll have Venmo. We figured out how to do it. It took forever, but our financial person who does all our finances in New York found out how to get us on Venmo, and we will be on Venmo next week. So I will put that out all over social media and let you guys know as it goes through. I know some of you said, like, I do Venmo, I don't like PayPal, I'm not comfortable with it, and we've been doing PayPal since the beginning. Well, not the beginning, but for like 20 years. So we're gonna do Venmo. So we'll have that up next week as well if you want to support us that way. And as always, like, I know money's tight. My money's very tight. It's a tough life. You can also help literally by retweeting these talks, sharing this stuff with other people, sharing even books that we've talked about here, things we've talked about, but sharing these on like your Instagram stories, letting people know what we're doing, or you're just in your Instagram alone, on your Twitter, on your Facebook. Some of you have been doing that more lately, and I'm really grateful. It really helps, and people really kind of get connected to us. So we're going to be doing some cool things in the future. We're moving forward slowly at times, but last year was a rough year for us. We lost a couple good people and went through a lot. And weren't sure where we were going to stand and if we were going to do it, and now we're doing it. So let's just continue to do that, but we can only do it with your help and your support. That's just where this thing is at. And I'm doing it, and I'm doing it for you. So if you like what you're doing, please help, and we'll continue to do this and try to do better as much as we can and try to do more. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great week, and I will see you next week. Happy Sunday, and see you in May. Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.